In this demo, we will get our first look at how to handle validation issues, in this case when creating something, a course for an author. Our project is up and running and we are in Postman. What you see here is a post request to create a new course for an author, but I set both title and description to null. Let's send this. We get back a bad request stating that the title and the description fields are required. Let's have a look at our course entity. On the entity, the title is set as required with a max length of 100, and the description is set as nullable with a max length of 1500. That is a bit odd. This cannot be the cause of what we are seeing. If these rules would have been triggered, we would only have seen a message stating that the title is required and not that the nullable description field is required. Let's have a look at our course for creation DTO then. We don't see any validation attributes applied here. So where are these error messages coming from then? Well, we'll try to get to the bottom of that. But let's continue by sending another post request. One with a description that is empty but not null, and with a title that is too long. Let's send this. And that just worked. That's a bit odd as well. And this is definitely not what we want or would expect, right? So what is going on here? Well, the reason this went through is that Entity Framework Core does not trigger validation on save. It simply tries to persist the requested changes. What happens then depends on the database provider. We are using SQLite, and out of the box that simply lets the update go through. If we would have used something like a SQL Server database, we would have gotten that exception because the SQL Server database provider would have checked for the maximum length on the title. Other providers can all have their own way of handling this. So this drives home the point that we should ensure that validation rules are in place and checked before we hit the database. First, we need to define our rules. We can do that with data annotations. Let's open the course for creation DTO model class and apply one. Let's state that the title is required. These validation attributes are defined in the system.componentModel.dataAnnotations namespace, so let's add a using statement to that. And while we're at it, let's have a look at what else is in there. There's attributes to check for valid credit card numbers, email addresses, minimum and maximum length, and so on. With these attributes, we can already get pretty far as validation is concerned. Let's add a few more. So we'll state that the title is required, and we'll just take over whatever we applied at level of our entities. For now, that will be sufficient. So we give the title a maximum length of 100, and we give the description a maximum length of 1500. Let's give this another try. We'll just send the same request that previously went through. So the one with a title that's too long and with an empty description. This time we get back a 400 bad request stating that the title must have a maximum length of 100. That's already looking a lot better. But what about that other issue then? This is the request we sent in the beginning of the demo. I passed through null for title and description, and we got back that the title field had to be required and the description field had to be required. Yet at this moment we had not yet applied data validation attributes. So what is going on here? Well, this has to do with nullable reference types. From ASP.NET Core 6 onwards, projects by default enable support for this. The feature has existed since C# 8. We're looking at Microsoft's documentation for this right now. The feature was introduced to minimize the likelihood that your code causes a null reference exception. It's on by default in .NET 6, so you are normally already using it. I like the features, but it can cause some unexpected side effects. The response we got when we sent null for title and description is one of those effects. Let's have a look at that course for creation DTO again. Seeing we are using the nullable reference types feature, the title string cannot be set to null anymore, and neither can the description. If we would want to allow that, we would need to explicitly mark this as nullable. So let's give that a try. I'm marking the description string as nullable explicitly. And let's send this request again. This is different. The only thing we see now is that the title field is required. This is the result of the required attribute. We no longer get an error because we passed through null for the description. That's because no required attribute has been applied at that level, and we mark the description as nullable. Do note that this is not the same as the required annotation. A string that's not nullable, but isn't required either, can still be set to an empty string. So I changed the description string back to not being nullable. So let's send an empty string instead. And here we go. This still only results in an error on the title field. That's because the description we passed through isn't null. If we pass through null again, we do get that additional error on description. So this can lead to a bit of confusion. I would say it's best to regard this nullable reference types feature as what it is intended for, avoiding null reference exceptions. But don't look at it as a replacement for your own validation rules. If you need validation, use the data annotations we just looked into, or one of the other approaches we will look into in the rest of this module, but don't rely on the nullable reference types feature for that. Anyway, let's send that request with the title that's too long again. This error is purely the effect of one of our data annotations. But where is this coming from? In other words, which part of the code ensures that these validation rules are checked? Let's learn about that next.